There we go.
There you go. Great.
All right. Thank you. All right. Welcome, everyone. My name is Lily Slavin. I'm one of the board members for the Charge Syndrome Foundation, and I'm going to be moderating this Ask the Expert session tonight. Thank you all for taking the time to join. Ask the Expert is a series that we put on as a foundation to give our community time to ask questions directly to experts in the field about different topics. And so today we have Chelsea and Paul Winchester joining us to talk about a really important topic. So I'm going to pass it over to Chelsea to introduce herself, and then I will briefly give an overview as to what to expect for today.
Good evening. Thank you all so much for coming. Paul and I are parents of 3 kids who have special needs, one with Charge, and we're so excited to be able to come and talk with you all and hopefully give you some more information and answer any questions to the best of our knowledge, and really kind of just kind of build a community of support for to help the families with Charge and then also others.
Awesome, thank you. So how today is going to work is Chelsea is going to start out by talking for about 10 to 15 minutes, going over some slides that she and Paul have prepared. And during that time, we hope that our participants will send in some questions in the Q&A box, which I will be monitoring. And then once Chelsea gets through the PowerPoint, we'll have a live question and answer. So please feel free to ask questions. We're hoping that it will bring some lively discussion. And so that is what to expect for today. So I'm going to go ahead and share my screen now and pass it over to Chelsea.
Thank you again for the Charge Syndrome Foundation for allowing us to come and share with you all tonight. For us, this topic is a super personal for our family. We're a multicultural family, and these are not just our kids are not just statistics, but they're real people. Our families are real people, and so we're just hoping to really be able to help families and professionals alike come together to help each other. So as I mentioned a little while ago, and you can go to the next screen. That Paul and I and our 3 kids, we live in Mankato, Minnesota. Our kiddo with Charge is Isaiah. Isaiah was born at 32 weeks, and he spent the first 4 weeks of his life in the hospital. Upon discharge, they said, go home, enjoy the time you have with him. I'm sorry.
That's okay.
And if he makes it to his first birthday, we'll be surprised. And so I'm happy to say that he will be 18 years old in October, and he's feisty and has all kinds of spunk. Throughout the years, we have seen so many things and experienced so many things with Isaiah. We've seen a lot of barriers that have come through experiences that we've had with Isaiah and different professionals. Back then we didn't always understand where some of the biases were coming from, and now we understand that families of color are more likely to get a lower level of care or denied access to care, which is not something that we were always aware of. So as we did our own, education, then we came to realize that us experiencing it was not a like an us problem. It was a bigger global problem. And that's where we really were like, we want to be able to help families and help professionals alike to be able to understand how to come together and really advocate for professionals, for the people that they work with, and for families, for their children or their adults that they have in their family. Racial bias has a significant negative impact on judgment towards treatment and care of services for those who are Black, Brown, and Indigenous and other people of color. I think that it's safe to say that as human beings, we all have bias. It's when we bring our personal bias into the professional arena that it can negatively impact the people who we are working with. You can go ahead to the next slide.
Mm-hmm.
So I want to take just a couple minutes just to talk a little bit about bias, just so that we kind of understand going into this what we're talking about. So the two types of biases that I want to talk about right now are cognitive biases, which is cognitive bias reflect those errors in thought process that can be influenced or changed by the introduction of new information. Motivational biases are more difficult to change as they form a form of maintaining a specific way of thinking. So both of those biases, they influence how we think, how we act, and then also how we treat the people around us. So we have to be aware when we're moving from when we go to working with people that we do have personal bias and we're bringing them to this professional setting. How is that affecting the people that we're working with? You can go to the next slide. Mm-hmm. So when we talk about racial bias and how it negatively impacts families of color, some of the things that we look at are language barriers, health insurance barriers, social status, and education. All these things put together create an enormous burden and barrier for families to get the proper care that they need for their loved ones. And so being aware of these things is so critically important for us as professionals, but then also as a parent to understand that everybody we come in contact with has a different lived experience. And so we may have to speak and advocate in a different way based on what biases we may see. You can go, yeah. So I'd like to take a moment just to let you kind of introduce our family. As you see, my family, I'm the only white one in my family. So even though I may not personally, before people see my family, get discriminated against or experience bias, my children do, and my husband does. And so this is a lived experience for our family. Isaiah, Joseph, and Mary all experience disability in a different way, but they all have been victims of bias and what access to care that they were denied. And so, like I said earlier, that we know that this is not just our lived experience, we know it's also the lived experience of others. Cultural bias is not just it's not just a small community of where we can say, oh, that's just in Minnesota, or it's just here, or it's just there. It forms everywhere, and it infiltrates schools and hospitals and different community organizations and how they help others. Oftentimes, when we work with people, we have these ideas in our minds, which are biases about who we think people are before we even meet them, based on a referral that we may have gotten. And so it's looking at all the practices within like governmental or organizational policies are very important from the professional, but then also when you're looking at parents, to have them to be able to understand that they have a right to ask for another provider, or have a right to make a complaint if they feel like they're being they're victims of cultural or racial bias. So we're going to talk about health disparities. I like to think of each one of these blocks as like a gate, okay? And so when you have just one of these things, it may not be a huge deal, but the more gates you put up, the more barriers and access it's being denied. So we'll start with economic stability. Economic stability includes employment, home, expenses, all these, I'm sorry. All those things are impacted with economic stability. If you are not economically stable, that is one gate that's put up for you, because you don't have the finances to be able to afford maybe things that another group of people might be able to afford. And then if you're not economically stable, that's also going to affect the housing and transportation that you're able to get. So there again, you're putting up another gate. And then if you don't have a high level of education, again, it keeps going. So all these things, and then so now let me get down to food. So if you don't have a good job, if you don't have a good place to live, and if you don't have an education, your food is also going to be affected in there, and how you're able to access food, and how much food you're able to access, and what kind of food are you able to access. And then as we move to the community safety and community and social services organizations, how you are looked at when you have more of these boxes checked can affect the resources that you're allowed to receive. And sometimes professionals don't even understand that the gatekeeping is being done. They're like, oh, well, we have to have standards, we have to have criteria, but the criteria eliminates entire populations of people. And so making sure that, obviously, like diagnostic criteria and stuff is important, but what other criteria is eliminating people from being able to access these same resources as other groups of people? Within the healthcare system, we know that there are large discrepancies with how people of color are treated versus white families. There is a stigma that if you have SSI, or if you have medical assistance, because you're not paying for it, then the level of care you get and the communication you get is oftentimes very different than people who pay for their insurance or have a high level, of in education or things of that nature, right? So when you go in, before you get to before you even check in at the front desk, they already have an idea of who they think you are. And so just being aware of those processes and being aware of what we're bringing into our workplace and the people that we're working with. So advocacy is ironically kind of where we started as far as Paul and I. Advocacy, we have had to advocate for our kids to get the resources and the support that they need and deserve. We've also worked with families who aren't always able to advocate for themselves and to help them ensure that they get access to the proper resources. Oftentimes, I always laugh and I say that Paul's the one with the fancy title and degrees, and I'm just the mom. But I know that moms and dads know their kids best, and they can tell you they don't need a fancy title with a fancy degree to tell you everything about their child, and they can tell you by looking at them whether they're sick, whether they're not sick. And so being able to talk with the doctors and having the doctors and nurses and social workers and case managers and all the people involved, being able to talk with them and being able to advocate for what your child needs is vitally important, because as a charge family, like our charge child, he's nonverbal. So he can't say, well, I didn't like that person, the way that person made me feel. So we have to speak as parents and caregivers and advocates for people with special needs, specifically charge syndrome here, that because they don't have a voice. So we have to be their voice. And so sometimes that means being the bad guy. Sometimes that means asking for another professional because that professional is not going to work with your family. Sometimes that means not going to that clinic anymore. Sometimes it looks like, not working with that organization. But on the flip side, also being open to resources and understanding that there are many people, honest people, caring people who want to help. And just because you've had bad experiences with other people doesn't mean that it's going to be that way again. So thank you. Oh, you're muted.
Sorry, I was muted. Thank you so much for sharing that overview, Chelsea. I think that this topic is so important to talk about, because if we're not bringing this out in the open, then, like you said, families can feel very much as if they're going through this themselves, when in reality it's much more of a pattern. And it can be hard to advocate for yourself and for your child to the degree that you need to if you're not as aware of these things that are going on. And we're not trying to say that the responsibility is on people who are holding these identities that are being discriminated against by any means. The responsibility really is on the system to change. And we as a foundation want to be holding discussions to empower families to be able to do the best that they can within these systems that are not always made for you. And also hold discussions to encourage systems to be better, because we know that advocacy can go a really long way with disrupting systems. And so we haven't had any questions come through the chat yet, but I'm curious, Chelsea, if you can speak to, have there been any experiences that your family has had that you have really been thoughtful about the way that you're advocating, especially if you've ever been in a moment where you've noticed, yes, we're being discriminated against as a family, and how'd you handle that? What did you do?
I mean, I wish I could say that it's only happened once. Unfortunately, that's not been our experience. I think that we saw it a lot. Go tell him to be quiet. I'm sorry.
That's okay. Yeah.
I think that one of like we're blessed to really work with a lot of great medical professionals. So when we find good people, we usually stick with them. Occasionally, we have experiences that, aren't positive. Some of the ones that mostly stick in my head is usually dealing with the public school system.
Mhm.
And so, like when Isaiah was 4.5 or 5, maybe he might have been 5 because he was going into kindergarten. It was actually the first IEP meeting that Paul had ever been to.
Mhm.
And they were like, oh, he's not capable of being mean. He's not capable of understanding. They're like, he's not capable of doing, like, really, they didn't feel he was capable of really honestly doing much. And so Paul picked Isaiah up and he had him help, he was like, Isaiah, turn the page. And so then Isaiah started turning the page, and he visually showed him that he was capable. He didn't say, oh, he can do all that, he visibly showed them that. And then like another time, they like Isaiah he was just sleeping in the class. They weren't teaching him. Every time Paul and I would come and chat, come to the school. The principal was like, you can come anytime you want. Just you don't even have to let us know. You're more than welcome to come. And so we'd come every time we came, he was sleeping. It was never being taught. We was never receiving instruction. And so actually the vision teacher that he had actually saw that Isaiah had some potential, had a lot of potential, and she recommended a whole nother program. And so actually that was when he really was able to get access to ASL. And so those kind of experiences, how, like I said, they come up, like now there's been so many of them, it's just hard to nail down like one. But like, I think that for us, it's always about like, instead of saying they have to prove that our kids can, it should be like, well, we have to do everything we can until they show us they can't. And so I think that that's really what we want, is like to really have people not think that our kids are not capable. Like, and, obviously like they may have, need extra support or whatever, but like they're human beings, and they love, and they're happy, they're sad, they laugh. Isaiah wants to go on Steel Venom or at Valley Fair. So I don't know who's going on that with him, but which is an amusement park here in Minnesota. And so I just think that like, if the more people tell their story, I also think the more people will be like, oh, I experienced this. And so to be able to have that dialogue of like, this is not a once in a while issue, and then to be honest about like, we have bias there, like it's not that it's, if we don't talk about it, then it's not going to be able to get fixed.
Yeah, I really like a lot of what you said, and the couple pieces that stuck out to me are really presenting people with counter evidence. So I love at Isaiah's IEP meeting, you directly showed them, no, look, this is what he can do. I've worked with a lot of families, not families with charge, but families who have autistic children, and this is a conversation that comes up a lot, about, especially in the school system, about how the words that school teams are using to describe, especially Black children and Black and brown children, and not thinking about how those words might be interpreted differently for students of color versus white students. And it's, again, the responsibility is not on the parents to be changing this. And it's also helpful for parents to be aware that sometimes or a lot of the times you're going to be surrounded by team members who might not have done a lot of processing about their own biases. And you might be the first one to say to them, we should be considering this specific thing because of the race or ethnicity of my child. There's extra considerations we as professionals need to be making to make sure that we're providing the best care possible to all of the families that we're serving. So that was one of the things that had stuck out to me, that you had said. And I think it's also important to think about how advocacy from parents is going to be differently received depending on the race of the parent as well.
Absolutely.
So, yeah, I don't know if you wanted to speak to that.
Absolutely. I think so. In our family, it's probably going to throw you off a little bit, because ironically, it's when people see me by myself, they think one thing. And then when they see my husband, they think another. So what has happened, so Paul will probably laugh at some point about this, because what happens is I think I say I'm the crazy special needs mom. And so oftentimes people think that I'm going to be probably the more rational person as far as like, and easier to work with or whatever. And Paul's going to be more like, he's tall and has a big presence. And so when in reality, what ends up happening is I'm like, no, I want it this way. And they're like, no, you're not going to get it that way. And then they figured out now that if they want their way, they figured out that it's easier to call Paul. And then, but like Paul and I have this discussion. I'm like, listen, this is what they want to do. He's like, well, what do you want to do? I'm like, I want it this way. And so that he communicates it in a more palliative way for them. And, you know, so, but I think that like language and culture and communication is not always understood by a lot of professionals. And so when you tell a parent that their child, like so my husband's from Louisiana. So when you tell a Black family from Louisiana that their child is deaf, blind, and that their prognosis, they have no idea. They don't know what their prognosis is going to be, and they may not make it past their first birthday. That message is very different to that family than it is to a white family with the same diagnosis. And so understanding cultural communication and how that works, because words, and it's not a matter of, I think sometimes people are like, oh, they're not understanding. No, it's not a matter of they're not understanding. It's like different cultures communicate things differently, and words mean different things. And so to them, like to any family, when you have a child with special needs, especially with, you know, there's probably going to require 24-hour care most of their life, all those dreams are going that they had of, you know, playing in the NFL or whatever it is, you know, being a model in Paris, whatever those dreams you might have had for your child are, those change, those look different now. And so then on top of that, if culturally if the provider and the patient or family come from different cultures, they may not be, it's not a matter of them not intellectually understanding what's being said, it's how it's being communicated. And then does the family also feel that the professionals are being receptive to questions? Because that's the other thing is that I ask a lot of questions, and so does my husband. We ask a lot of questions, and I'm the worst. I like the worst case scenario. So what's the worst thing that can happen? And anything that less than that, I can be okay with. But like, you have to know each family and who they are, and build those relationships with them, and not just your patient 5,832, and I have 10 other patients that I have to get seen. So I need to get you in and out so that I can get on to the next patient. And so, and being aware of those situations and understanding that it's most of the time, it's not that a parent's not understanding. It's like you've given them a lot of information, and they're trying to process it as well as understand like that they have to go home with this child. You've seen them for 30 seconds and you have just given them this information that's just changed their entire life. So understanding that cultural communication is super important.
Yeah, and I think along with that, as you were talking, it made me think of the importance of community. And the charge community is already really small, and then the charge community, and then with just different intersecting identities, that's even smaller. So the charge community is already super spread out, and it can feel really isolating. So you add other marginalized identities on top of that, and you can especially feel like you're not getting information that is relevant to you or your child, or that is being told to you in a way that you understand. And I think that it's really important for us as a board and as a foundation moving forward, that we're really reaching families that have different combinations of intersecting identities, because we know that is going to really significantly impact your experience in receiving healthcare, in receiving education, in your child's quality of life. And so we really want to be having these kind of discussions so that every member of our community is feeling heard and represented. And also, like, you have a voice to be able to bring ideas to the foundation and the board as well. So yeah, I just think that it made me think of that, because I think one of the strengths of charge is that sense of community. And we know that even within our community, there's sub communities and people who experience life very differently.
Right. And I think that like having that, I think what we attended the Charge Vision conference for the first time in 2019, and I think that the idea, like, I really liked that there was families and professionals and bringing them together. But representation does matter. And so like, it's easier to get people to come to things when you see a whole bunch of people that look like you. It's, and so it's, it's hard. It's harder when you're like, okay, how do I relate to these people? Because no one looks like me. No one looks at me that's presenting. No one looks at me that is going. And so, and it's not, and I'll say this, the Charge Syndrome conference is not alone in the lack of diversity of conferences. There's a lot, most of the conferences that Paul and I have attended, Paul was really the only person of color there. There might have been more people, but Paul was pretty much, the person of color there. And so, that's something that I would, we as a family would love to see, change just across the board. And helping families not feel that they can't come because they don't have people that look like that. Yeah,
I think that's a huge piece of inclusion and meaningful representation too. Yeah, I appreciate you bringing that up. And yeah, we're really looking for ways to continue to make things as inclusive and representative as possible. And for anyone who's attending or anyone who will be listening to this recording, we are hoping to be very open to feedback and involvement from others who are wanting to help us in that direction as well.
Absolutely. And I think that, like, parents want to believe in the people that they're working with their kids. We don't want to think that people don't want to work with our kids or think of our kids as less than. And so I think part of how it works too is that I know you keep saying that it's not dependent on the parent, but I think that sometimes, like, the squeaky wheel gets their grease. And so sometimes if enough parents make some noise, then change can happen.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, that's a good point. There really is strength in numbers. And when I say it's not on the parents, I just want to make it clear that I'm not saying, oh, parents, you hold the burden to change this system that's not made for you. And I also acknowledge that, yeah, a lot of times it is really strong advocates that end up pushing systems to change that really don't want to change. So I love the idea of forming those powerful coalitions of other parents. And it also reminded me of something that you said earlier that I wanted to highlight, of the professional allies that you had said, when we find a good professional like Isaiah's vision consultant who advocated for you, kind of getting different programming and different services, that's so important. So when you, while it's not your responsibility as a parent to be bringing these things up, you pay attention to who is responding in positive ways, because those are people that you probably want on your team, right, and that you can start to ally with and bring with you to fight that fight. So, for example, so I'm a professional. I'm not a parent or a family member of someone with charge, and primarily in my clinical role, I work with autistic children and their families. And oftentimes, I try to have these conversations with families about, tell me about about what identities are important to you. Tell me about how those relate to one another. Tell me about how that's impacted your child's healthcare. And because we've had open dialogue about that, a lot of times families will invite me to their IEPs so that I can go and as a white provider can amplify their voice, because how I hold many levels of privilege, including my race, including my level of education, including the just where I'm working, and my ability status, and I can use that power to help amplify the voice of the family that I'm serving. And so sometimes it can be especially empowering to find those people who do also hold privileged identities, to help amplify the voice, your own voice.
Absolutely. And I think that that's, so we have been blessed where we have set up a pretty good team. I'm actually a little bit nervous because Isaiah is moving into a whole other area of life now. He's meant to be an adult, so making that transition to adulthood has me nervous about, a lot of those are going to change. But the idea of making sure that you have good working relationships with the people that work with your family, and understanding that you don't have to work with people who don't want to work with you. If, you ultimately, as a parent, as a caregiver, you have the right to say, this is not working for us. And I understand that this is your specialty and, you have the education, but the bedside manner and how in our relation, how that working relationship, if it doesn't work, if the families don't work with that person, then they should feel comfortable enough with saying, this isn't working. We need to find someone else. Mm-hmm. And I know in some areas that's more available than others. Like in Minnesota, we happen to have a lot of options. And I recognize, we lived in Louisiana for a year, and that's not an option down there. They don't have, either you want to go to the neurologist or you don't. Because and these are the three that are available in the entire state, or and so there are areas where selecting a provider isn't really an option, but in Minnesota and other areas and larger communities, it is more of an option. And so if you don't like your provider, I would advocate and say, and then also if something happens, then you're like, wow, this is really crossing the line. Make a complaint. And I know that people are like, oh, I don't want to do that and whatever, but the only way that change happens is if we say something. Mm-hmm. And the provider may not even know that they're doing it necessarily because they're not aware, but chances are if they've done it to you, they've probably done it to other people.
Mm-hmm.
And if you get if enough people complain, then the organization that they're with will have to do something.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and I think it's also important to acknowledge in this discussion that in some cultures and communities, it's you are really, it's especially hard to speak up to professionals like that. And there's in some communities there's a higher reverence for professionals, and you within certain cultures you're taught that professionals know best, and that can be a big shift, especially, and it can be especially hard in those moments to first even recognize that you're being discriminated against, and then to be able to put yourself out there and say something about it. So we recognize that this is really challenging, and even being able to speak up like that comes from a place of privilege. And we have in the a comment in the chat just acknowledging that, yes, especially within kind of Hispanic population, it can be really, really hard and takes a lot to go wrong to actually feel like you can speak up. So I think it's that's another layer of identity that's especially important to think about.
Well, absolutely. I think that there's also not enough talk about systemic trauma, right?
Mm-hmm.
So like if I have had a negative experience with professionals, and I come into a place and these professionals look like the people that I had the negative experience with, I am less likely to want to have a positive relationship with them, because I'm already kind of on defense when I go in, because I'm like, oh, okay, well, this happened before and it may happen again, and I don't know these people, and they remind me of this other situation, and they might not have that intent. The new organization might not, but that's where building that relationship and rapport with families is so important.
Another comment in the chat that immigration status can also be a big factor in terms of the openness with which families feel comfortable or safe speaking up, and that's another area of privilege or lack thereof in being able to speak openly and advocate for services for their child too.
Absolutely. I absolutely agree. And I will say that I don't know how it works in other areas. I can only speak how I know how it works in our area. So I know in our area, if you can actually submit complaints anonymously. And so as a way to try to eliminate that kind of barrier to making sure that families also get assistance to, so they can have, because they shouldn't feel that those mitigating factors are a reason why they shouldn't get the proper care that they need.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, that's a good point to think about, ways of still getting the issues brought up without having a direct target placed on them for that.
Absolutely. Yeah. Absolutely.
All right, so we have about 10 minutes left. I'm curious, Chelsea, is there any kind of parting words of wisdom or questions that typically that are commonly asked that you wanted to bring up to wrap us out?
I think that overall, I just wanted to say that parents should be looked at as kind of like the general manager of the team rather than the water boy. And both positions are valuable, but one is more of a lead. The leadership position should really be for the parents or the caregivers. And I think that parents should feel comfortable regardless of the situation and being able to advocate for their child and professionals should be open to hearing the feedback from the person who is in charge or in direct care of the person with the special needs.
Mhm. I like that. Actually, I had to take a second to write down that quote. I think that's so important how you said that. Parents and the individual really are important team members, and so often professionals don't treat families that way, and it can be hard to shift that up, especially if that's not the culture of the place that you're going to.
Absolutely. Absolutely.
Yeah. Well, I think I think this was a really helpful talk, and I hope that our attendees found it helpful as well, just to raise some awareness and open a dialogue around this topic. I think it's I imagine that this is not going to be the last of these that we do, and we want to really make this a priority, or continue to make this a priority moving forward, to just make sure that we're giving a platform to talk about these kind of topics, because we know that the more that we talk about them, the better that we as a foundation will be able to support families, and hopefully the better supported families will feel. So we do have, as a board, we do have a subcommittee that meets specifically around these topics. And so if anyone is interested in learning more, or getting more information about that work group, let us know. You can send here. I'll put my email in the chat, so that if anyone's interested, you can send me an email to get some more information. We are always looking to just build our community, and get people involved. So let me just put my email in here right now. All right. And if anyone has ideas of similar topics like this in the future, that would be helpful for us to promote as a foundation, please send me an email as well. If you have ideas for other great speakers like Chelsea, or other topics that you as a family would like to hear about, we will really want to make sure that these are being reflective of the needs of our entire community. So please don't hesitate to reach out. All right. Well, with that, thank you so much, Chelsea, and tell Paul thank you as well for his help with making the materials. And I think, Lourdes, you're good to stop the recording. And thank you everyone so much for coming today.